So here we go. Update 21st of September 2021. And I'm a bit slimmed down after the summer, but you can still send stuff to me or go to our website there. Right. Okay. So you have to do a bit of thinking now about statistics. Two sets of statistics where you'll have to do absolute bog standard thinking. Right. This is an article on Standard on deaths and serious injuries in London, a report from TfL, and it was a report by Ross Lydall, who's actually quite good normally, but here's the heading: post-lockdown toll on London cyclists laid bare. You know, pretty doomy, grim. And it says, cyclists accounted for almost 3 in 10 of all deaths and serious injuries on London's roads as lockdown lifted. It can be revealed. You know that in the press when it says it can be revealed, it means there's something pretty grim, but we've done a lot of hard work and we find this thing. So actually, if you read the article a bit further down, it says, the overall risk of being injured while cycling in London had fallen. When you look at the overall rate, i.e. the risk per journey, it is lower, according to Lily Madsen. So the casualty rate has gone down, and the reason why there is a high proportion is because there's probably lower collisions, something to do with lack of traffic as lockdowns lifted. But this is why you do have to be very careful at looking at things like this, and you have to see how much of this is part of this sort of trying to scare people off, dangerizing people, dangerizing cyclists and putting people off. Okay, now here's some details. I think I mentioned this last week. It's about the anti-motorcycle barrier on an off-road path in Surrey, and how the barrier has now been taken out. And that's the judgment. There's the link. So if you are trying to deal with anti-motorcycle barriers on off-road paths, you may want to refer to this. It could be useful. So there it is. Now, also, there's the police crime sentencing and courts bill going through, which a lot of people are worried about because of power of stopping demonstrations and so on. But under the leadership of Roger Geffen at Cycling UK, RDRF with Road Peace, and PACS has come on board with British Cycling and Living Streets to put out an information sheet for House of Lords members to ask for some things which we should be going for with regard to road traffic law. And if you want to see that briefing sheet, do email me and I'll send you the full sheet. So it was a bit too long to get on the slide. Right, now this is the all-party parliamentary group on cycling and walking. Final report with regard to CWIS 2. Reaching our active travel potential. Ruth's mentioned there was a YouTube recording of it. I haven't actually been blown away by what I've read from it so far, but other people can say what they want about it. Here is a summary of the recommendations. Main thing is, I think, a new Highways Act. I know Phil Jones is very keen to see that. So I don't know if Phil wants to say anything about it. I have asked Adam Kaufman if he wants to make some comments about it and where it is and what it's all about and how good it was and so on. But you can read it there. On reading lists and consultations, etc. There's something called the Create Streets Foundation has done a, it's about the levelling up agenda and people who are left out, do take a look at that. And here's Road CC's report on the all-party parliamentary group on cycling and walking. Here's my graph from last week showing how the cost of motoring has gone down compared to everything over the last 10 years. To get hold of that graph, which was done by the RAC Foundation, so it's very mainstream. Here, a bit of the qualities stuff, a tweet from Mrs. Omar. I don't wear Lycra or any other cycling outfit. I wear outfits that I feel comfortable in. What a beautiful day. So there's a bit of stuff for your qualities page. Right, here's a bit more statistics from Uncle Bob asking you to get your thinking caps on. This is from the Essex Safer Essex Roads Partnership, have done a Vision Zero report, which you can go to at that link. My concern about these things is that everybody says Vision Zero, but when it actually comes to what they're doing, what are they actually doing? Anyway, you can read through that report to see if you think Essex has got it right, but I just wanted to focus on this graphic here. Now, it's quite good in that it looks at deaths and serious injuries per million miles traveled by mode. And so there you see motorcycling way up at 5.6. Cycling a lot less hazardous per mile traveled, and in fact only about twice as hazardous as walking per mile traveled. People inside their modern day tanks, of course, have a even lower rate. So I wanted to say that there are two things wrong with this, with looking at things this way. And you should know what's wrong with looking at things this way. But rather than grill you live and prevent you from attending if you don't get the right answers, I'm going to actually say what I think is wrong. Now, the first thing that is wrong is that if you're talking about human experience, you shouldn't talk about deaths and serious injuries per mile traveled. You want to talk about it per journey. So that would bring the motorcyclists way down because, of course, they're doing a lot more miles than walking and cycling. So that would bring them down over to here. If you are looking at it in terms of journeys, of course, though, the pedestrians, because pedestrians have typically far shorter journeys than bicyclists, would go up with regard to bicycles. So, and motorists would go even further down. So that's just something to think of. But of course, what we want to talk about is the impact of these modes on other road users. What are the chances of deaths and serious injury per million miles, if that's the way you want to do it, to other people? And what you'll find is that it's cars, along with vans and lorries, that are the high ones. Also, motorcycling is pretty high, particularly in urban areas, in fact, higher. And then you would have way down, you would have cyclists and walkers. So it's about danger to other people rather than what is done to you. This is victim-based, and if it's victim-based, it's going to tend to end up victim blaming. So just my thoughts there on some statistics in a publication you may want to look at. Okay, Upper Shoreham Road, Cycling UK, this is good news, has won an appeal to secure judicial review of removal of the West Sussex bike lane. So you can see everything there. It has been taken out, and there is Extinction Rebellion people blocking the old Shoreham
Sorry, Bob,
Road.
you're mixing old and upper.
Right.
They're completely separate things.
I'm
Upper Shoreham
completely
Road.
wrong.
Upper Shoreham Road is in Ada District Council, and it's the one that Cycling UK have got appeal. They won on their appeal, and they can do a judicial review. This is Old Shoreham Road in Brighton.
You're quite right. I have got that wrong. And you're not in there, Mark, are you? No. Old Shoreham Road Cycle
No,
Lane.
I'm not in there. This is XR doing things.
Yeah. Looks a bit like they're on yoga mats, though, or Pilates mats.
They are. They did yoga in the road.
Oh, very good stuff. Righty-ho. Okay, I stand corrected. There you go. 2 different Shoreham roads. I just heard this yesterday, Bolton Council to scrap the protected cycle lanes on Chorley New Road, which is another thing coming out. So that's a bit of a bloody nuisance, a bit annoying. I don't know if anybody wants to say anything about that. Right, now to London. You remember the protest on 8th of September when we spoke about that last week? And we did actually talk under Brian's bit about the next junction further up on Southampton Road. And news was given this last week on the 15th that Camden Council is planning to make road layout changes at the junction of Southampton Road and Theobald's Road. And that's the one which Brian was talking about at some length. And there's some bits and pieces there. I don't really want to make any comment about it. I don't know if London Cycling Campaign or Camden Cycling Campaign want to say anything about that. There's still some advanced stop line boxes in there. I don't know if it's genuine improvement or sort of turd polishing, as they say. Simon's got his hand up. Simon, do you want to say something now before we carry on?
I'm happy to.
Yes, please do. Tell us what you think about this.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I've had numerous conversations fairly obviously about this junction of late with a whole bunch of people. This is TfL and Camden Council moving fairly quickly for TfL and Camden Council. And this is very welcome in terms of the fact that it will do some quite quick measures to quite seriously mitigate the risk of another fatality in the same spot that Dr. Marta Kravitz was killed. But as I think I said last week, it's not the only bit of this junction that is blooming dangerous. So actually there are other turns, other movements across this junction that need an urgent look at. Now, TfL and Camden have said they're working on a bigger, longer term scheme. The simple reality again with all of this is, yep, brilliant, great, get crack on, get something in now, good, get something in as quick as you can, good. But what we need is a complete solution for this junction, for every arm, every turn, every movement. But we also need, and particularly for the east-west massive flow of cyclists. But also we've got loads of other junctions that are just as bad as this, or worse in some cases, or marginally less lethal in other cases. The ride for LCC passed through 3 junctions, particularly along that route, the London Boulevard route, that are just horrors as well. So what we really need is a long-term finance deal for TfL, and then some blooming fast action, thanks very much, on not just one junction, and not just after a fatality, as ever.
Yeah. Okay, righty-ho. Let me crack on for the moment. Other questions at the end? Right, and I just wanted to have a look at Simon's Twitter thread from last week. Do go to that. And I won't read through it again, but just do have a look at what he said there. Right, London Parklet campaign on Twitter. It's People Parking Day on the 25th and 26th. And there's a video, or you can go to their website. So, yeah, People Parklets, People Parking Day. The Lambeth Monitoring from, I mentioned again last week, very positive results. In Camden, yeah, there are various consultations as some of the temporary pop-up cycle lanes and LTNs are being made permanent. Do please, if you not only live in the area but ever travel through it, do go and do fill out your consultations to make these things permanent. Camden, Lambeth, Islington. If you see any consultations on Twitter or whatever, do please get in there and do your consultation. So this one's on York Way. There are other ones which are coming through. Southwark is removing the cycle lanes and widened pavements on Rye Lane. I think that's been mentioned before, so that's another thing coming out. Ealing, yeah, this Wednesday, Ealing Council's Cabinet looks set to decide to take away a further 54 kilometres of safe filtered streets. So, you know, we know about Ealing, so it's kind of bits of bad news, bits of good news. Right, now, e-bikes tailored for war are on show at the Defence and Security Exhibition International Arms Fair in London. And machines have already been sold to nations like Denmark. So I was going to ask Steve to do a questionnaire survey. Would you like to have one of those? Don't forget, this has a rifle holder on the handlebars. And the fact of the matter is that despite the fact that you're all kind of Guardian reading, greeny, pacifisty people who don't want to be warlike, I know that deep down in your souls, you want one of these with the rifle holder on the handlebars. And anyway, it's green because it has a portable solar panel to allow you to charge your battery. There is a lot of stuff actually seriously about bicycles being used by the military in the First World War and the Second World War and Vietnam, etc., etc. And it's the kind of thing Colin Reed knows a lot about. I know a few things about it. So if we really wanted to, we could get into it and have a long thing. But that looks a kind of pretty tasty machine there, you know. Okay, so that's something you really wanted, although you may not be willing to admit it. Yeah, so here's again from Paradise Street. I selected this photograph to say goodbye to you on. That's from Milton Street in Belfast in the late 60s. Look, you know, just one car there, kids running across the road, kids there, and kids using the lamppost in a creative way. So, yeah, and I'm thinking of having odd adverts for bicycles as well thrown in at the end of my presentation. So there you go. And I think Dave's got a question. Anything you wanted to say, Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Yeah, I just added a comment there that bicycles, I've got a lovely Cuban manual on how to adapt your bicycles for warfare, towing a mortar on a trailer and all the other things you could mount on the bicycle. So, and also the fact that the Viet Cong beat the US and the French armies in Vietnam simply by soldiers with bicycles. You could destroy the entire infrastructure. But as long as there was a track that you could push a bicycle with 250 kilos of supplies along, you could take 250 kilos of supplies down to the front line, rip off the bamboo stake, and then cycle back for more. So amazingly versatile thing. I was just going to go back to the Theobald's Road, Vernon Place and Southampton Road junction. Every approach to that junction has substandard lane widths. After the fatal crash, I checked it out. The lane widths coming from the north down Southampton Road are all just about 3 meters. And I have actually had a similar incident myself at that junction, where I had to punch the door of an HGV that was going to try and turn left through me as he'd come up straddling the near side and the central lane. So very much so, the measures that Camden are going to put in immediately seem to be a pretty good match of what's needed to determine there, to make sure that the left turning trucks are turning left in the left lane, which has ample radius. And there's even space on the footway to put a cycle lane in that curve space on the corner. So I'm
going to say the same I said last week, Dave. And, you know, we can't quite redesign it, and just watch the use of the substandard as well. There's no like minimum width for a lane. There's awkward in between them.
There is. It's 3.25 meters. 3.25 meters is the minimum single lane width.
It's absolutely not. So there you go.
Rubbish, rubbish.
Yeah, but there you go. Here, that one.
Well, any less than 3 meters, and you're taking wing mirrors off any large vehicles.
What kind of street we're talking about? Look around the city of London. There's two-way streets that are 2.5 meters wide. There's all sorts of stuff out there. So let's watch those terms. I'm going to bring. Sorry, Dave, have you finished? just when we start redesigning stuff, there's good people looking at this one, and there's people that have been looking at it for a long time, and so I want to watch this on that one. I'll bring Graham in, and then I'm going to go through the hands, but Graham put his hand up earlier, and he's going to tell us about Bolton.
Yeah, it's really in relation to what Bob was saying earlier about Bolton Cycle Lane. That was about it's a stretch of road in Bolton, which is one of the main roads in and out of the town. It's about a 5 kilometre long stretch, which was identified in a consultation that happened just about the time the Emergency Active Travel Fund came out, as the highest priority in Bolton to have active travel infrastructure treatment. So that was agreed that would go in. It was designed and everything. We had some criticisms, but it was going along. September came and nothing had happened, and it was actually not until January that this Emergency Active Travel Fund scheme went in. Well, it didn't go in; it partially went in, and then in March, one of the councillors in one of the 2 wards that this spans said that he'd got lots of angry correspondence from hundreds of people. I don't know how much, because it was in his personal mailbox. And that eventually resulted in the council halting the installation of the facility. This is I think it's £275,000 Emergency Active Travel Fund project. So that stopped, and also the council executive then agreed to that there should be an immediate consultation happening. The plan was to actually install the thing for 6 months and have a consultation at the end, in the way that the DFT now specifies is the right way to do it. So they had an immediate consultation, which was actually 2 weeks online in the lead up to the local elections, which elicited, I think, 790 responses in a borough that has 280,000 people in it. The report from that consultation was actually released a few days ago publicly. It had gone round the houses a few times with officers asking for revisions, and when I read it, I couldn't see how anyone could possibly argue that there was good cause to take this facility out. But we knew that that was going to be the result, almost certainly. Yesterday was the meeting of the exec member for Highways and Transport, and it was at that meeting yesterday that the decision was taken to rip it out. Now, the consultation has effectively been treated as a referendum. One of the arguments that's being put forward is that 68% of the people responding, which is that 0.28% of the people in the borough, actually didn't like the idea of having this facility in. In fact, if you read the report, a lot of those were people who were actually objecting to the implementation because it was incomplete, there were gaps in it, it wasn't dealing with junctions properly, and so on. And there were cars parked in it and so on. So actually that is just not true, the way that that's being portrayed. And that's where we stand. Now, it's interesting to note that one of the things that changed in the most recent communications from DFT about this topic of highways authorities removing cycle lanes was that whilst in November they actually said that there could be sanctions taken against highways authorities, in the most recent one, which was in July, they actually said highways authorities and other authorities that are contained within combined authorities, of which Bolton is one, and that's a change to the messaging of DFT. So I think it's not the last we'll hear about this one, and certainly for the combined authority, Greater Manchester Combined Authority, they really can't afford to let this slide, because there are 9 other districts in Greater Manchester whose funding depends on the funding stream from DFT through the combined authority. So that's where we stand at the moment. So it's a bit unsatisfactory.
Thanks, Graham. That was great. Really good summary. Quite close to that one. So I'll move on. Sally, come in. You had your hand up for a while there.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to comment very briefly on the all-party parliamentary report on active travel. And I tweeted about this just to say that there's lots of good stuff in it, but like Bob, I thought, I don't know, there were some things that I thought were quite weak. There's a lot of focus on behaviour change. But the thing that was really disappointing was that there was barely any mention of children having specific needs at all. Children are just mentioned in terms of a target of walking to school, I think. And I think really what was really good was to see so much focus on the needs of disabled people walking and cycling and with other mobility needs. And I think we really need the same kind of degree of attention for children. And it's just really, really disappointing to see that it didn't look like any effort had been made to even speak to somebody with that kind of, that could have had some kind of input in terms of inclusivity. And also in terms of including children in consultation, there's a huge amount of work to be done in including children in engagement and consultation, and which kind of barely ever happens at the minute. So yeah, I don't know what we do about this, but I feel that if we're really going to make a change, then we have to change this. Children do not just travel to school, and they do not just walk. We don't just want them to walk to school. We want them to be able to do all sorts of things. And kind of leading on from that, I think Phil Jones saying we need a new Highways Act. Fundamentally, we do, because unless we do have that, at the minute, children are still not allowed to play in streets, according to the Highways Act. So, we really do need a big revision of how we do everything in streets. And if we are still producing reports like this, which don't really mention children, then I think we've got a long way to go.
Yeah, I'll just say something. There was reference to mobility justice, which is a real actual comments for all inclusive things, and perhaps they could have unpacked that. But I do feel like that's kind of where that sat in the document.
Yeah, it does need to be. There was just, if you didn't actually search it, there are 2 mentions of children. There are, I think, probably dozens about disability, and so I think what we need is the same amount. I think it is really, it's really good to see that there, but children are, the needs of children are different, and I think unless we're actually quite explicit about that, then we won't see what we need to see in the way of change.
Yeah. With you all day there. All good. All right, I'll go over to Ruth.
Thank you. Well, a couple of things with regards to the children. Up till 2010, there was the active travel plan, which every school had to have. And the primary school that my son went to in 2001, we actually had a whole scheme, and we worked with Groundworks, I think they were called, or something, and the children did do assemblies on walking and cycling to school. They did assemblies on what they would like to see and how they would like to do it, and then we went with that to the council, and then we said, well, the kids would like this and this around the school, because the school was in a traffic island. We got a few moderate things, but not enough as we would have liked to have got, which we may have got today if it was still in action. So I think the active travel plan, or whatever it was that every school had to have, has now been replaced with STARS, which for the life of me, I have no idea what it stands for, and nobody else seems to know what it's about. Children, obviously, there were all the housing estates there with the signs everywhere saying no ball games, no playing here, no being allowed to play out. So that was a kind of anti-children-y thing. And I don't know if you've all caught on the news that in East Twickenham, there's a school where the head teacher has demanded a railing on the school, outside the school, which they've just put in, because it's a very dangerous place for the children to cross. Now, the crossing isn't on the desire line anyway, and we all have, gone on to Twitter and piled on, really saying, well, there shouldn't be a railing because it's a death trap for anyone cycling. And actually what they should have done was a raised table across the end of the street. Alexander Amon, who's quite a good councillor who's done the Kew Road protected cycle route, has responded saying, well, we had to do something quickly, and the head teacher wanted the railing. Now, I think it's awful if head teachers and teachers are demanding something that pens children in rather than canvassing for safe cycling, walking round their school.
Yeah, well, like for every teacher that like that, I know there's plenty that would do more and have kind of given up hope of trying to get changes through as well. So I do feel like Sally's point's absolutely right. We've got to support the kids and the teachers, and that should be the main focus for shifting everything as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, the point. All right, I'll move on to Tim.
Sorry, Brian, can I just say you're very mumbly? I don't know if it's me and my
mumbly?
Hearing, but I missed half of that. You need to speak.
I was saying it quite quick and wasn't really sure what I was saying, so
okay.
Always better to mumble. One then, Tim, come in and be clearer than I was.
I'll do my best. Just a bit of a sad note, really. As you know, Leicester are doing safer streets, healthier neighbourhoods, as opposed to LTNs, which everybody hates. And they're the same thing, by the way. And they're doing consultation at the moment. And I saw a tweet from the local paper showing parents, adults standing in a street to prevent traffic moving through, not because they wanted bikes and children moving through, they wanted to stop the safer street, healthier neighbourhood in its tracks. And subsequently, Choose How You Move group tweeted that they regretted, but their researchers had to leave the area sooner than planned due to police advice. So it's an area that wasn't particularly expecting to become a safer neighbourhood, but the officers, the councillors were really keen on it. So they were pushing ahead. But yeah, we've had bite back. We haven't got one Leicester here. Somebody else has got that tag. But yeah, there has been some pushback here. On the other hand, we had Jessica Ennis in town to launch Santander bicycles, and that's gone really well.
Can't hear you, Brian.
Brian, you've gone off.
Shall I keep talking?
Yeah, I can hear Tim. Leo just said M.
I said because I was going to show everyone something that I've been working on this since the start of lockdown. It'll take 30 seconds, and since Brenda's
please
here,
do, yes.
I hadn't planned to, but yeah, since Brenda's here, I just need to share my screen. Here we are. Rob knows what I'm about to show you. Here we are. Looks like a common street scene. Wait for it. Hey. So nice. Yeah, we got some pop-up park that's going in this week, and some more permanent ones coming up soon. So there we are. That was it. I thought you'd like that, Brenda.
Is Brian back yet or not?
Can I ask a really boring question of Leo? Well, it's not a boring question, but we're having a little bit of a thing with our council about which traffic order you use for parklets, and it's very boring, and it could just be a way of not doing something they don't want to do. But did you find any difficulty with that? And if not, can you say which traffic order you have used?
This is best directed at Rob, actually, because he's literally in the midst of this right now.
He's written the traffic order book, has he?
No.
Yeah. Go on, Rob.
Are you talking about a temporary or a permanent one?
Don't complicate it. Tell me the answer.
Well, there's two different answers. The simple answer is the temporary. Okay, well, the temporary one that we're doing a lot of, there's some pop-up parklets this week for Car Free Day. It's pretty straightforward. If you just type into your local council, your borough or whatever, website, parking-based suspension, or Google it, it should come up, and you have to pay a small fee. In Bristol, it's £29 per bay. You can get access for a day. So that's a temporary thing. It'll be a TRO for the permanent one, which
so hang on, for the temporary one, it's a parking bay suspension.
Yeah, and then for the permanent one, you'd need a proper TRO, which would take a lot more money, and you'd need to negotiate that, and that's the process that we're really working on. Is we want to get a sort of permanent process like Hackney's got, or at least something, that in most authorities that can then be used by residents off the shelf. Is a page you can go to find out how you do it and what the barriers are going to be for you, or what you need to do to make sure you've got the public's buy-in and the streets buy-in, all that kind of stuff. So we're working on that. That's going to be it. That's a work in progress.
Surely you could use the same order you use for putting a skip on the street. It's a works notice. It's temporary works. You could use a temporary works as you do for a utility opening or anything like that.
Sure, but I think there is most council websites, as far as I know, have got just a parking bay suspension. So that, I think that is the same thing probably that is used for skips, but they probably put it on a different web page, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, our council cited concerns around safety and people driving their cars at these parklets. Like I said, one does suspect that it's possibly, if someone's predisposed to say no, then you find all sorts of reasons to say no. So that didn't come up for you then, safety concerns?
Well, in Hackney and Walthamstow, you have to bookend the bays with very substantial, so they were cast iron planters, which is what I used in my Gorilla parklet. So once you fill big cast iron planters with earth and bookend the bays, the plant locks, I don't know if you've heard of them. Plant locks, no? They narrow cast iron bays which have a handle that acts as a bicycle lock, so you can lock a bicycle either end of it. That's a plant lock, and you bookend, so that either end of the bay, you have those, and the driver cannot drive into it, and that becomes safer. So both Hackney and Walthamstow, Hackney suspended its program and Walthamstow's just starting one. They're both using the parking suspension method because it's easier. That's why they say it's just easier than using a TMO or a TRO. And they can do it for 6 months. And they say it's not ideal. You shouldn't use a parking suspension for a year, but in Hackney, it's been going on for over a year for parklets. That's the mechanism they're using because it's convenient for them. And I know Rob is talking about using other methods. That is not used in the 2 London boroughs that have allowed parklets. They're going down the parking suspension route. And well, that's it. Brian, can I go into my my quick presentation? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, great, thanks. So just following on from what Sally was saying about the Highways Act and children, one of the things we want is for the default use of a curbside not to be car parking, so that we don't need £5,000 for a TMO for each parklet or a TRO. So that's one of the things we need the central government to do. We need the Highways Act to be changed. So I'm just going to quickly talk to you or promote to you People Parking Day. And here we go. Yeah, so that is us. Yeah. So you've still got a chance to take part in People Parking Day. It's now the 25th and 26th of September. It's this coming weekend. So you get 2 days for the price of 1. And I'm just going to, so we're asking people to just do something different in a car parking bay. I'm just going to show you the video. Okay. Oh gosh. Escape that. Oh. No, actually, I don't know how to get out of this. I don't know how to get out of this. Sorry, folks.
Top of the screen.
Top
Sorry?
left, escape.
Okay, yeah. Just escape.
Escape button.
Trying to do escape. It's not escaping, so I'm going to stop share. Yeah, so I've gone back. But I was going to show you the guide and other stuff. But if you go to the website, you'll see our guide, and you'll see other information about People Parking Day. So this is the first ever one, so we're not being too ambitious, but we hope it'll get bigger and better each year. But if you do decide to, and we'd really like you to do something in a parking bay, to just get a photograph of yourself or a video and just email us or tweet us or Instagram us, because we want to build up a map. We're building up a map of activities across London to show that actually Londoners do want something else rather than car parking on their streets, just exclusively car parking on their street. So yes, I'm going to shut up now, and thank you for listening. Thank you.
That was absolutely fabulous. Can you put the link up so I can share it now quickly to other people? Because I don't know how to go off this onto the, if you don't mind. Aileen.
Yeah, of course,
Thanks.
I'll do that. I'll put that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Just awesome.
Yeah.
Well done.
Okay.
Well, am I back?
Yeah.
Hey. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, sorry about that. But at least we were entertained by Brenda, albeit I was variously hitting various mics, but we're back in. Right, let's go over to our main speaker then, Rob, who's going to put my two favourite words together, citizen and science, and tell us about that. Go on, Rob, all yours.
Thanks, Brian. I'm going to share my screen. Bear me a second. Which one do I want? That one. So yeah, this is some research that has been going on. I'll get to the top of the screen, start from the right place. But I'm from Possible, if you didn't know, so same charity as Leo, and we've been doing a traffic filters citizen science survey. We call it traffic filters because it's slightly more accessible as a term than modal filters, which probably most people here understand as a term. Effectively, we did this as a mass study, so basically going out and talking to people, knocking on their doors and asking them to answer some questions in a traditional survey format. We went only to streets with either a modal filter or an affected adjacent street, so it needs to be in the same sort of directly adjacent to that street with the filter on it. We had 29 people take part and 6 of our staff members. We got a study size of 272 households, which was, I think, okay for the scale of the project. We ran it in July over a few weekends and a few weekdays. Most of the surveys were completed in person, but some were online. And we did it in these 4 cities, Birmingham, Bristol, Leeds, and London, which is the 4 cities where we've got car-free campaigners as a charity. So I'm the one who's in Bristol, if you weren't aware. And we've also released data sheets that's publicly available so people can look through and make their own conclusions on the data if they want to. I can make that available as well. So the key findings, what we found was actually just already flag up all of these graphics done by Duncan Gear, who's our data visualization person. He's fantastic and did a great job on these, I think. So it's not entirely surprising, of course, but 85% or so of people wanted to keep the traffic filter that was in their street. And we found that over time, if there was someone who was there when the filter was installed, which wasn't most people actually, it was a minority of people, but of those people, their like of it and their love of it grew over time. So this graphic sort of demonstrates that. We asked them about what they felt before, immediately afterwards, and also now in the longer term, what they think about it. And we didn't, by the way, go to places where
one woman in North London is fighting to park something completely different.
I don't know where that's coming from. Okay, that's an interesting bit of news broadcaster. We didn't go to places that recently had traffic filters put in for fairly obvious reasons, that it's contentious, but also because we wanted to see this sort of progression, to see what people's perception was over time. It's pretty much across the board. People from many backgrounds think it's safe. Their streets with the filter are safe or very safe. I won't dwell too long on that one because it just shows various things. I mean, obviously, car owners and car-free households might be an interesting one to look at. People who do own cars think their streets are slightly more safe than people who don't, for instance, which is an interesting thing to think about. In terms of if you remove the filter, what people thought would happen is, again, across the board, more traffic, more noise, worse air quality, and that final one, less space for people. It's a bit lower, probably because when you think about it, if you remove a filter, most people can't quite compute what that would do to space in their street. They don't really, it's a bit difficult to figure out whether that would help them or hinder them. So that's probably why that's a little bit lower. And then there's a few other little talking points that we could probably go through. It's all to do with disabled people and households with young people. A small proportion of people with disabilities report that they consider their street very unsafe, which is a lot more than people without disabilities, which is something worth commenting on. We also found that households with children under 18, again, found that we found that they were more likely to say that they felt their street was very unsafe. And it's, again, it's just a reminder that when we're thinking about all this stuff, it's about the variance between life perspectives and how it's important to take all those people into account. We also asked questions about car ownership and space equity and some of the alternatives. We found, actually, interestingly, that just, I think it's just by chance, really, that the places that we went had higher access to a private vehicle than the national average. Obviously, you know, about 2/3 of people park their vehicle on the street. Again, we asked about whether people thought there were the right amount of parking on their street, and the majority said there was the right amount, because it's difficult to judge, again, where people's, you know, whether they think what they think about parking. And we found a small but you know, consistent number of people wanted to see parking spaces actively be purposed for things like the things we've been talking about, so parklets, cycle and scooter storage, and other alternatives like that. I think it does show that, though, we do need more work. There's more work that needs to be done to kind of illustrate the alternatives to this kind of mass car ownership in cities. What next? We've got a sort of a tool you can use to write to your local councillor to get them to turn to the mayor or council leader on your borough council or your local authority, and to the cabinet member for transport in that area, because we want to present those survey results and say traffic filters are incredibly popular where they are. There's been a lot of conjecture going back on this research already online, of people saying, you know, we haven't got we haven't gone out to places where they haven't got traffic filters. We haven't talked to people on boundary roads. You know, the natural kind of questions that people ask. Obviously, our survey was very focused on those roads that have filters, but we want to show that in those places they are really popular. So yeah, if you could get involved and do that right to your councillor tool, again, I can link to that in the chat in a minute, then that'd be good. And then finally, it's about the potential for community envisioning events. So we do more work perhaps on how we co-design low traffic and livable neighbourhoods in our communities across the cities. It doesn't have to be just the ones that we're working in, if possible. It's a way of kind of a way in to talk to your councillors and the people who make decisions about transport in your local area. So hopefully that's a positive contribution. We've got this really good evidence to show that people really like this stuff when it comes in. They don't want to get rid of it. They want to keep it, on the whole, 85% of people. And that's the link to the results. I'll try and put that into the chat so you can have a look.
Thanks, Rob. That was great. Yeah, that 85% figure is a keeper. All right. You know, well, it's interesting for me. I'm going to ask you a few questions, and please put your hands up, everybody, to come in. But like that kind of framing of the argument, it is like a, you know, if you went to someone with a filter and said, "Oh, do you mind if we send 6,000 vehicles a day past your street?" Everyone's going to go, "Hell no," because you're changing it. Whereas if you go up and say, "Do you know the 6,000 vehicles a day going past your street? Do you want to tell someone about it?" Go, "Hell no, don't change it." What's the thing? It's that classic way of framing it. the way I've been talking to people, well, to groups about low traffic neighbourhoods, are saying, here's the deal. Residential parking's doubled in the past 10 years. We need to do something about it. You've got less rent. You can't cross the road. The air quality is going in there. What should we do? Now, what should we do? And I think like your kind of citizen approach really like kind of hints at that. So yeah, no, great stats and great work really. Has anybody got any questions for Rob? I just wanted to get that off my chest. Who's got them? Is there anything you think you want us to know about framing it? Oh, I can see Tim put his hand up there, so I'll go let someone else talk for a change.
Did you? You had a slide which is a great presentation, by the way. Thank you. The slide with the circles that showed 85%, 80%, and then down to 63 at the end. Did you give them those possible answers and ask them, did you agree that air quality has improved? Or were you collating what people said about how nice the neighbourhood now was?
No, it was a scale. So you say, if you remove the filter, how would you feel about this issue? And then you'd say, it'd be how, what would your perception be? Would it be more noise, a lot more noise? It's like a scale. So
lovely. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Excellent. Dave? Sorry, I was just watching the show then and I forgot I was supposed to be doing something.
Yeah, I was going to come back with, you were mentioning, Rob, the desire that we needed to do something about car ownership. Here we've got some LEZs coming up, and there's an initiative to get people to get rid of their old polluting car, but not get the money to buy a new electric car, but join a car club. Was that ever sort of promoted or tied into any of your survey work? Were people aware of that? Because I know that ITS in Leeds, Greg Marston has been working out that about if we went shared cars, we would reduce the number of cars required by about 90%. So 90% less parking required, 90% fewer charges, 90% fewer cars by people sharing them.
Yeah, we asked a specific question about what kind of vehicle ownership. We had one question about, do you own any private vehicles, and then swiftly followed it, do you have any shared vehicles? And frankly, I don't know the figures for that. I can look them up now, but it was quite a small percentage, as you'd imagine. We felt that with this survey, we were trying to be obviously as impartial as possible when we're going out and talking to people, that we're just reading the survey questions. Obviously that's the right thing to do and is rigorous, but also it felt like a lot of people were having ideas introduced to them just by the questions we were asking. Inevitably, a lot of people won't have heard of a parklet. A lot of people won't have considered a car club, particularly if there's not one close to them. So just by actually asking those questions, we feel like we might have done a bit of service there just to those people that we spoke to. And obviously it's quite a small number, but it all adds up. So I think there's more scope for more studies on that, because I think that there probably are more people who want to give up their car. And in fact, I did have one person who said they'd given up their car during COVID, not to replace it with a shared car, but they had to in the household. So, I mean, there was, from my own experience, and I went out on a number of sessions, I didn't come across a lot of people talking about that, which is sad. So there's a lot more work to be done, frankly, on that issue.
Well, I think there's a big awareness thing on shared transport. I've just seen the Telegraph article on heated bus stops and changing routes for cyclists going to catch the bus. And nobody is going to spend sort of 2 or 3 minutes getting changed to catch the bus after parking their bike. It's a lack of awareness how integrated and shared transport works. So I think it's very difficult to phrase that sort of question. And I'm wondering whether you found there was awareness that they could actually hire or, not actually own cars. That's it might be an interesting question to ask. If you didn't have to own a car, would you hire or would you use other means of getting access to a motor car? Would you use a taxi? And I know in areas of low car ownership, like the schemes in Glasgow, people tend to do the weekly big shop and go home by taxi, because a £5 or £6 taxi fare is cheaper than running a car once a week.
Yeah, it was interesting. I remember, sorry, jumping in. Go on, come back first, Rob.
No, all I was going to say is absolutely, and I just, in retrospect, you can always think of more questions that you should have included, and that's probably one of them. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to do a wary note on car sharing, because it's a context thing. I remember when they were pushing it in Camden back in the day when I was there, and I was kind of quite anti it because most people didn't drive, and I didn't want them to get a taste of it and get it in their blood. That's just like cards on the table now. So for me and the policy person who was leading it, we were the most anti-car people to ever be involved in it. So apologies, but yeah, it can be an interesting intervention when it comes to that. You've just got sheer car saturation. What do you do? Can you get them to share? And Greg will say that theoretically, but one of the big things that goes against automated vehicles and the car sharing is that will people share? Will people want to sit in a car that someone else has sat on? Will they wear secondhand clothes? It's that whole kind of thing. And so I'm not sure we'll ever get the huge amount of shift that we want, but maybe we will. But I kind of gave up on the just share car dream many years ago. Maybe it can come back. There are different perspectives. Any other questions for Rob? Really bad on shared cars, aren't I?
I'll come in with something.
Go on, Ruth. Put me out of
I was talking to my son who didn't want to appear in vision. Rob, one of the obviously is what about the disabled, and Wellesley Road in Chiswick has been made access only, and there are 2 trees with the most awful root base, which means that you can't get wheelchairs, buggies or anything over them. So I was cycling along yesterday and a man on his wheelchair was using his, they're not wheelchairs, what are they called? Mobility scooter in the road. Now that's because it's a traffic calmed equivalent of an LTN. There isn't enough made of that, and it's very difficult because I engage in local forums and people say, oh, she's very callous, she doesn't care about the disabled. But we need a bit more visibility about how for disability, having a traffic calm street is infinitely better, because all our pavements don't work, do they, for mobility scooters, nor wheelchairs, nor that sort of thing. So that's all I wanted to say, really.
Yeah, and just to come back on that, I feel like one of the projects that we're looking at in Possible is putting together a sort of diverse image library, because a lot of the way that we sell modal filters or low traffic neighbourhoods or whatever, like anything, any scheme like that, is through the lens of a cyclist and through the lens of just someone who rides a bike, and not everyone wants to, not everyone is able to. So we need to look at the other ways that people get around on the streets. And you're completely right that needs to be shown more, that people who use mobility scooters and wheelchairs can still access streets with modal filters. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I remember when we were doing the international best practice in infrastructure, it's like an infrastructure study, there was like a disabled symbols that they were using in Spain in the cycle track, and I was desperate to get them on the main super highways in London, and particularly around bus stops and the like, just to show there's other users here. And yeah, lots of mobility scooters started using Royal College Street when we put it in there. I was like, great, that's what it's designed for. That's why I never called it cycle lane. It was just a protected bit of space away from cars. And I think we're all starting to transition to that mobility lane approach now. So yeah, let's have it in there. Go on, Dave, you got your hand up again. I'm being so rude to you today, but is it a historical hand?
I've got to cancel it, Brian. I've just sort of been playing.
Okay. We'll consider that hand cancelled. All good. All good. All right. Yeah, I've got over my mic incident and we're back now. Go on, Simon. Come on in.
Yeah, I'm just I'm always fascinated by. I mean, I think like more inclusive images. Yeah, brilliant, great. Like, bring it on. But I'm always slightly wary of this kind of wariness to talk, and I would say this being from London Cycling Campaign, but this wariness to talk about cycling as part of the mix in that sense. When Lambeth put in their mobility lane, which had exactly that, had a picture of a wheelchair user as well as a scooter, as well as a cycle logo in the lane, all it got was just a wall of attacks as usual. So I think we're a long way away from this kind of idea that everyone can share those kind of spaces and it's going to be wonderful and whatever. Like, the simple truth is, every time anyone puts in an LTN, there's loads of pictures immediately on Twitter of folks on mobility scooters, kids playing, doing all sorts of interesting stuff. Yet those are the attacks we still face every single day. You know, that opposition isn't going to go away just because we do better on picks, as it were. We have to kind of tackle some of the rubbish that's just being said over and over again, with a mix of, you know, schemes that are just allowed to bed in and stay in, the data that comes from them, you know, surveys, etc. So I think picture's brilliant, but I think ultimately we have to be a little bit less apologetic now, in a sense, about the fact that they are good for cycling. They're also good for walking. But the other thing that I think, particularly on LTNs, that no one ever talks about is community. You know, this is Appleyard's work on you know, community connections, and that's the big benefit from planters, really, is folks talking to each other in the street, you know, but we don't say that. So anyway, I'm always wary about this kind of, don't talk about cycling and hide it away as if it's the evil kind of redhead stepchild, you know, of all this. We actually have to just be really clear. This is the way forward. All the data backs it. Here's loads of testimonials from folks in mobility scooters, but also here's a load of people who never cycled before that then started, etc.
Yeah, I take that on board. I'm a big fan of talking about the unseen benefits as well. For instance, we recently had in Bristol, in the eastern area, a railway bridge underneath just got, you know, blocked. In fact, it wasn't even, it's a modal filter, but it's covered over with like blue surface. It's brilliant. And I've got 2 young kids and I need to get my daughter to sleep sometimes. So I walk down to this space that didn't exist before, and I literally go in a circle around this space until she's asleep, and then I come back to my house. It provides a massive utility for me. And there's probably loads of other instances of that kind of thing where you've got a proper utility to the space that's being used. And that's what I got a lot of from talking to people on the doorstep of the surveys, people saying, we're able to do this, we're able to do that I'm not normally able to, we aren't normally able to do. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think the other big thing that comes out of it, Rob, and you mentioned it as well, it's the size of the opposition over time. In the kind of end state opposition was 8%. Now that's like when it can seem like that's the 95% sometimes if you listen to the rhetoric, but the end state, we're always going to hate it, is actually really quite small, and that's a good takeaway. So I'm thanking you for giving me a stat on that today. All good. Any more questions for Rob, or I'm going to kind of finish up on some business I was going to do last week on the design review and show you some Dublin bus stops. Should we do that? Yeah, why not? Yeah, nobody else has said that. Well, let's share a screen and because what we're doing now, press the white buttons, don't I? All right. Can we all see a big page of designs? There we go. We're coming out of it. Yes. Well, good. And you can hear me. Well, yeah, there's some really interesting stuff going on across the Irish Sea at the moment. I was fortunate enough to be involved in some of this last summer, and went in with some Dutch engineers and Danish, and they got like kind of who's who and me to kind of like feed in on the bus cycling network plans. And they're absolutely massive and really far reaching. And they're really trying to do some cutting edge stuff. Well, cutting edge stuff for this part of the great continent of Europe, I will say. And like, because they drive on the same side of the road as the rest of other people in the UK, there's some real good practice to learn. And I thought, like Shane said, have a look at the bus stops on this. So I didn't have a look at this when he asked me to get involved. It was just around the junctions, and there's some fascinating stuff happening about the junctions, which is probably worth another special. The next time I can get over to Ireland to see my family, I'm gonna take some videos, because there's some quite very interesting junctions being done in Ireland at the moment. Let's let that person in. But yeah, let's talk about bus stop bypasses. And I was looking through their document, and I think this is available online on the Bus Connect program, but there's a whole ton of ideas that we should be taking on board in England and Scotland and Wales as well, at least considering. But anyway, enough to do. Let's do a kind of design review. Look at this bus stop bypass with LEDs in the road. So we remember back a few weeks ago when George was talking about like warning signs and stuff. Yeah, our good friends in Ireland have gone a little bit of a step further here with kind of push button units that can call up LED lights or mount. So it looks like a standard like a bus stop bypass, but you've got these kind of lights in there to kind of flash. Now, I remember trying to do this with Westminster many years ago, many years ago, to kind of like warn pedestrians where cyclists were cutting across the path. And I won't say the name of the place, but it was quite dramatic. And what we did in the end wasn't anyway. Anyway, that idea of like, will cyclists stop with the flashing lights, and will it only work at night, and a stop line associated with it, of, you know, how will this work out? I think it'd be really interesting to know. I'd be worried, like technically, like if this came across my desk to review, I'd be worried about, well, will they stop for like getting a cyclist to stop mid-link, which is what you're effectively asking them to do. It's just like to get pedestrians over into a bus stop, and expecting pedestrians to cross there is another thing. But anyway, getting cyclists to stop mid-link is really quite difficult. You really kind of have to slow them down. So just with that kind of layout, they've done the classic like 3 things of like getting a cyclist to slow, well, of getting a car to slow down. They've tightened the cycle lane on the approach. Well, you can see my finger. They see it goes from 2 meters to 1.5. So okay, we've got some horizontal deflection, and then we've got some like a big kink in it. It's even now and it's raised, so we've got some vertical deflection in there. So a big kink, narrowing, horizontal and vertical deflection. The classic 3 that would get a car to slow down in most cases. But what we found in London was it didn't really have any effect on cyclist speed doing that. And I can show you all the evidence. I see Simon's hand up. Simon, jump in if you.
I was just going to ask, because we've seen a variety of bus stop bypass designs, particularly on that width issue. You know, we've got a few down at 1.2 with a little bit of buffer or things like that. So I'm just curious whether we know what the speed reduction, if any, is for some of the narrower ones.
Well, yeah, this is the thing. That's the point I was going to make. When you narrow it, okay, it gets tight for cyclists and you're around and you've got that kind of conflict and what's going on. And actually, they're not really adjusting their speed. Well, I can tell you on the CS2 ones, it had a 0.0 effect on cyclist speed, which was a real shocker as well. But we found when we put the zebras on, and that did have like a slowing reduction, and that's what's missing here. So it's like, is it how we're chasing the evidence around? But there was this new aspect of having signal control, but doing it in a slightly different way, a kind of floor-based signal. So there was a lot of unanswered questions about whether this will work. I'll bring in Mark first, and then I can see Shane, because Shane, I was hoping I'd rattle your cage on this one as we go through. But Mark, come on in.
Sorry, I've been sort of trying to do 3 things at once, so I haven't necessarily
only 3
have said all of this. Only 3. I've been listening to Brighton's Transport Committee and talking about a potential piece of work in Anglesey. So one of the things that I think you may have mentioned but may not is the biggest risk of all, which I keep banging on about, is slips and trips on the bus. The biggest risk to people is not to pedestrians and passengers, is falling over when the bus does an emergency stop or an emergency start, or even normal stops and starts. If the driver has a cognitive load of trying to look for a cyclist who's coming out in the wrong way, then they're more likely to have to do that, because they're trying to look at the passenger sitting down. They're possibly taking fares, but maybe not in London, but other places. So looking at it from a pure pedestrian bus driver bus interaction point of view, that's what floating bus stops do best, is they get the bikes out of the way of the bus driver's perception. The bus driver doesn't have to worry about it. And I think this is something that's really very few people have actually looked at, talking to bus drivers. Or anyone, but particularly bus drivers, about what their problems are. And I think, I talked to them, nearly 8-9 years ago, but it'd be really good to try and start talking to them again, find some bus drivers and find out what they think about their passengers and their experience, both the ones who work on areas with floating bus stops and areas without, and just see what they think about it. I don't know. Maybe some of the people doing cycle training who've done, David Dansky's worked with bus driver groups. So maybe there's an in there, the people who've done, the bikeability for bus drivers. That's a way into the bus drivers groups.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that, Mark. I like that one. Yeah, it'd be interesting to then compare it with shared bus borders and no state to see to get that bus driver's perspective. Yeah, good one. We'll take that one away. I'll bring Shane in, because you're a man on the patch here.
Hi, Brian. Am I audible? This headset's a bit unreliable. Yeah. So we have these near where I live. I was very skeptical at first, but I like them now. We don't have the flashing crossings, but what we have, the key intervention, I think, in terms of the bus passenger and cyclist conflict is that there's actually guardrail on the downstream side of the bus stop. So that if somebody's getting off the bus, instead of their instinct being to walk, say, to the right of the picture, if they're going to the right, is to push them to walk towards the area where the designated crossing is, for want of a better word, so that they are facing the cyclists and the cyclists are facing them. And then they can have some kind of negotiation in that area there. And I don't know about the flashing lights or anything. I think if there wasn't something keeping people, pushing them towards that crossing area, then a proportion of people would get off the bus and just walk facing away from the cyclists in whatever direction they want to go. And, so it's a bit of guardrail there where your mouse pointer is. Creates it encourages behavior that I think makes the thing work. Now, some people will just still jump out on the road and hop around the guardrail, but I have to say I do like these. I don't know about the flashing lights issue. That feels a bit over-engineered to me.
Well, normally, like, guardrails, the very definition of over-engineering as well. So, but it's interesting, about guiding people towards that way. And if people were to step out from behind the back of the shelter and be unsighted of a cyclist come through, there is a risk of collision. But then, by virtue of the fact that it's a bus stop bypass, is kind of still an implied kind of priority for cyclists. So you could go, well, actually, there's a different treatment, and it was a bit more like a public realmy, to use that, drop a bit of public realm on it, as we say in urban design. Would cyclists be going through there slower anyway in a pedestrian priority space that they're kind of allowed through? So I kind of think guardrails the strongest possible nut to crack. But maybe if you dropped a bit of planter instead.
Brian,
come on, Dave.
Well, can I suggest that we make Brenda happy? And actually, all you need there is a mini parklet or a rain garden for drainage. Pick the right plants. And the other thing that you have on bus shelters, which pays for them, is the 6-sheet poster. And that's really annoying on the ones on Sauchiehall Street, is that the 6-sheet poster is right next to the gap of the bus shelter that lets people out to cross. So you're heading along, you've got the westbound cyclists on Sauchiehall Street approaching a bus shelter, and immediately in front there's an advertising poster, and right from behind it, a pedestrian steps out. So the bus shelter should have the advert at the downstream end.
No, they should have no adverts. We took away all our adverts in Brighton.
I'm kind of with Mark on this one. Go on, Mark, say that argument.
Well, no, I'm just saying, I've just put it in the chat. We specifically went for shelters with complete glazing all the way around, no adverts, which meant we lost all the income from ad shell, which meant the council really did, or Clear Channel, whichever, which meant the engineers or the finance people really hated it, because rather than getting the shelters paid for by somebody else, the council had to pay for the shelters. And that was 10 grand per shelter, 150 grand for the whole scheme, just on new bus shelters. But it was felt that it was worth it in order to get the visibility, so everyone could see everything.
So in this case, so what is on some of the Manchester ones, if you had the shelter like this, but it was built all out planting style wise, so it was like a little bit more attractive, maybe a few slotted curbs for some suds. Is that a way of getting a kind of win if you wanted to keep the advertising panel in, like Mark, and still getting this kind of safety that Shane's saying is working quite well, and we don't want to get rid of that? So
no, I'd put a health warning on that, because we have a bus lane passing in front of the bus stop, and the roadies tend to stay in the bus lane. Okay, so, and it's the same situation I'm thinking of as well. If that was a standard dual carriageway without a bus lane, you might have much faster people using the cycle path on 2 wheels than you do at the moment. But that's going to start happening with electric bikes anyway. So we could be facing that with all the designs. And so
we had 40,000 cyclists ignoring the floating bus stops on Lewis Road at the weekend, because it was the London to Brighton, and they all came down the bus lane, and very few of them, because my son, very few of them used the floating bus stop.
Well, so it's interesting. So there's a bit more like there's a traditional argument, like Shane, that I'm hearing, but it sounds like the flashing lights thing has not been a massive success.
Oh no, there's no flashing lights from where I am. Like there's just a standard yield marking for the bikes. There's a yield marking for the bikes at that point where that crossing is. No, I don't know to what extent people on bikes respect it or whether it makes any difference. I think the key intervention is the fact that you have people walking towards each other and making eye contact with each other. That's how I would feel.
What's fascinating about this, for me, which is why I'm kind of unpacking it, is this: you have these stop lines, and it's a formal control crossing, but it's relying on the lights in there. That go on, Simon. Yeah, I can see you shaky heads, but it's an interesting one to watch.
So from what I remember of the TfL study on bus stop bypasses, the level of compliance increase from starting to get into very formal signals, as it were, is basically sod all. Like slap the zebra markings down on the road surface and make it a raised table, and that's done most of the job. That's why TfL was so loath to then get into like having beliches. But also every time you do this, you're adding massive cost to every single bus stop bypass. So TfL have limited the number of bus stop bypasses with zebra beliche lights pretty much to, I think it's just the one on Westminster Bridge Road right next to the hospital. That's it. Because it doesn't add a lot. And I think actually the more you get into start getting to formal signals for this kind of thing, because the vast majority of people are just going to turn up at the bus stop and walk straight across one way or another, you're into a situation where compliance is a real worry. You press the, if you're disabled and you press the button and you're in a wheelchair and you wait, are cyclists going to stop, or is it better to make it a negotiation in the first place so that you start wheeling out and cyclists know that people are going to do that?
I'm saying, but as soon as you use that word negotiation, and visually impaired groups are completely up in arms against you. And what's really interesting about the work that they're doing in Ireland on this at the moment is they are taking the accessibility things really seriously, particularly in some of the junction designs I've seen. So I'm kind of like interested to see where it goes, and does it give us a kind of new option, or like will it improve cycling compliance? Will it not?
I think it's all about that, exactly that. It's all about whether it does increase compliance, because visually impaired people waiting for a light that then a cyclist ignores is still going to be an issue. So that's my worry is will compliance improve? Whatever we can do to make compliance better, worth thinking about.
I'd sound a health warning on that, Brian, because I try to be diplomatic here. Some of the individuals that are putting themselves forward as disability activists or representatives of the visually impaired are also very stringent, I would call them anti-cycling campaigners. So that some of the stakeholders in this discussion about these designs, people from the cycling side of things would have concerns that they're approaching the discussion with a kind of demonized view of people on bicycles. And I think to echo what Simon is saying, I would have concerns that people on bikes are not necessarily going to stop at traffic lights, and creating an expectation that they will is not necessarily a good thing to do.
But then that's like evidence for the people who were demonized, going, they don't even stop at a traffic light. That's the ultimate thing you can do to stop a vehicle, apart from maybe Ross Atkin and like barrier. But
I get it, the argument I would make is that if you have a cycling-friendly city and cycling-friendly designs, that the visually impaired will benefit much more from that approach to infrastructure construction or infrastructure design than they do from a car-focused approach. And
but fundamentally, what we're looking at here is a completely car-focused street. So given that the car focus is still there, it's not like it's down to a small amount of traffic on. This is like a big dual carriageway, 6 lanes of traffic. Go on. I'm being devil's advocate.
I flip it the other way, because this issue hasn't been adequately discussed in relation to people crossing roads with cars, which is, there was a study done by Barbara Peston, either Peston or Preston in Manchester back in the 80s, where she found that 77% of females crossing the road were being knocked down on the green man. So I think people have an inappropriate expectation of safety from green men and red men sometimes when it comes to cars. And I think, and I'm not arguing, like I'm not arguing against providing for visually disabled people, but it's just that sometimes the expectations of protection are not valid and are not supportable. And is a negotiation a better way to approach it?
Well, yeah, that's the fundamental. That's what we found when we did the international best practice study. We found that other people said, don't do the stuff you do for a car. It doesn't necessarily work on a bike and all this. So when you come to like trying to stop a car in the road, the red light's the ultimate tool we have as a designer, and a stop line. That's as good as we've got, but apart from actually closing the road, I suppose. But like if you're still going to keep some kind of movement, that's as good as we got. So you're thinking, well, a cyclist or a vehicle, do we apply those same things? But what the Danes told us and the Dutch would say, don't use the roady type stuff because they'll start behaving more like cars. And this is like there's the great big rub of it. So this is basically like and I'm a big proponent of this. It's a small road going beside the road, and they're trying to apply mini road behaviors to it. And you're getting smaller cars.
Yeah, do the people on bikes have a green light approaching that? I mean, you know, because that's one of the issues with signalized crossings is they give motorists a green light, and a green light, you know, for some people means push my right foot down harder against the pedal. Like,
that'd be an interesting one to see if they do have a flashing amber state on it and a green, like, and what that does to cyclist speed through there, knowing that you're around the bus stop and people are going to be walking and coming backwards and forwards, or does it just pull up that red state when someone presses that button? It'd be interesting one to unpack this one. Let us know when somebody builds one. I'm definitely coming over. There's a few junctions I want to see in Ireland at the moment. Go on, Mark. We'll start winding this bit up now. There was
okay, no, I was just going to ask Ruth's around as well, so she'll know exactly where I'm referring to. Has anyone been, apart from me, been on the Princess Avenue track in Liverpool, where there is a floating, opposite Princess Road Synagogue, where there is a floating bus stop where everyone walking along the footway has to walk. So there's no back of footway. So on your design at the top there is no back of footway. So everyone walking along has to cross the cycle track twice if they're walking, even if they're not getting a bus. They just are directed across the track in all directions. And it's really awful. And it's awful for everyone. And the rest of the scheme's great, but that one pinch point where they really didn't want to compromise the road widths has ruined the rest of the track. And I was just wondering if anyone else has used it.
We talked about this the other week, Mark. Maybe you missed that one, but I was showing that the Leeds Bradford ones that did just that when we were discussing it with George about how do you fit.
No, I was on that one. But that one had like half a meter footway at the back of the footway. This one has
some of them
nothing.
are right to the back. Some of them are right to the back with no footway. And so there are some out there. But like, again, it's a context thing. How many people walking? How many people cycling? What's the area character like? How many people are crossing the road? Sometimes that can work on a kind of longer route. But if you're going through a kind of high street, then that's going to be a problem. Expecting everybody to hop over. Okay, we're reaching the end now. But Ruth, did you want to come on with this, and then I'll transition over to your last word? There's loads.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I've sent an image to Mark Barrett several times. Oh, my voice. In Holland, in rural areas where walking, cycling is, and wheeling and everything else is for everybody, they have this blip thing, I call it, which does that. So you can add it on top of the path. So as you cycle along or moped along, you have to go up and down. So automatically you slow down, because if you don't, you take off like a rocket. And it could be placed anywhere. And then if it doesn't work, you can move it back, because they are, as I say, added on top. Because he was asking me about Vauxhall Bridge and in the park, Hyde Park. And I don't know why we've not even explored that, but it is a very good, cheap tool doing that.
Yeah, it just depends how it's designed. I can imagine that could all take someone.
It means that you have to, I love them, you go block to block, because you sort of slightly up and then down again, and it's all very smooth. And if you do the right pace, then it doesn't deter you at all. And if you try and do too fast, then you would, you know, go flying, and you'd soon learn not to do it again.
Yeah, there's dips and there's sinusoidals and stuff that have that are inflatables. There's a whole bunch of like a vertical traffic calming options. Well, like, honestly, can't you just make it look like it should behave? Can't there be some like a more pleasant way of doing this? And again, I'll always revert back to that study when we went around and asked people about this, and they said just make it look nice. Make it look like this is not an area that you should be dominating people in, and people will slow down and interact in a more civilized manner. I'm going to believe that. And over to Ruth for the last word. Go on, Ruth. Let's wind it up for the night.
Thank you. I came hot foot from a birthday celebration with my nephew in Kew Gardens. He was 40 today, and he is Camden. I'm never quite sure what his title is. George would know. But very, very early on, we were talking about the APPG report. And the problem is that they are being given these projects to design very quickly. So like Haverstock Hill, which they kind of put in, then it was going to go to judicial review. So then they have to redesign it. And the officers, I may have said this before, are exhausted, and they've got too much work on their plate. And often now, if you're having to bid for money and you don't even know if you're going to get it, it really is a problem. So for the cycling and walking investment strategy to work, there has to be a given amount of money that is then vetted whether it's being designed and spent properly. But we shouldn't be going through this farce of our officers spending time designing something, going into a bidding war. Will they win it? Won't they win it? And then if they don't win it, they've got to waste the time. So Haverstock Hill was a terrible waste of money, really. And now they've got this, whatever the thing that Simon was talking about in, which is very important, obviously. But it all takes resources. And, you know, for anything like Hounslow, I mean, Hounslow lost staff hand over fist. They're going to a call-in on Thursday night at council by a councillor who rides the wrong way down the street with no helmet and on pavements. And yet he's called in about the new cycle routes in South Chiswick. So, you know, it's all very hard work for you all, those of you who are professional, and for those of us who are campaigning, trying to keep supporting you. That's what I wanted to say.